Yep. We'll be fine. So something about myself is, I am an intractable contrarian. I always have been. My family is here today. They can all confirm this. And by the way, if you're wondering which ones are my families, just look for the people nodding vigorously. They're not here to hear me preach today. They're here because Henry is turning 1 year old on Wednesday next year. My mom used to say that I would argue with a fence post given the opportunity. I think being a contrarian is just part of my nature, for better or for worse. I remember when I was an undergrad, it seemed that most of the people I knew were very willing to justify the use of violence if it achieved some good. And, you know, they sort of endorsed just war theory. They were a bit hawkish. And so in response, since I'm a contrarian, I found myself thinking, you know, Jesus has a lot to say about turning the other cheek. Maybe I'm a pacifist. But then this strange thing happened. I went to grad school, and when I got to grad school, it seemed that everyone there was a pacifist. And so then I found myself thinking, maybe I'm a just war theorist. I don't know. This is just something weird about me. And so because I'm a contrarian, I get a sick sort of pleasure from preaching parts of the Bible that no one ever preaches on. And today we shall indulge that pleasure by using a sermon text that I have rarely, if ever, heard a sermon on. Let me see if I can get this clicker. And we're going to read one of the middle chapters of the book of Job. When most people read Job, certainly when most people preach Job, I think they read the beginning and they read the end, but not so much the middle. But today we're going to read chapters 13 and see if we can take some lessons away that may edify us in our Christian walk. Sound like a plan? Yeah. Good, let's do it. We'll read from Job chapter 13. All right, Job chapter 13. My eyes have seen all this, my ears have heard and understood it. What you know, I also know. I am not inferior to you. But I desire to speak to the Almighty and to argue my case with God. You, however, smear me with lies. You are worthless physicians, all of you. If only you would be altogether silent. For you, that would be wisdom. Hear now my argument. Listen to the pleas of my lips. Will you speak wickedly on God's behalf? Will you speak deceitfully for him? Will you show him partiality? Will you argue the case for God? Would it turn out well if he examined you? Could you deceive him as you might deceive a mortal? He would surely call you to account if you secretly showed partiality. Would not his splendor terrify you? Would not the dread of him fall on you? Your maxims and proverbs of ashes, your defenses are defenses of clay. Keep silent and let me speak. Then let come what may. Why do I put myself in jeopardy and take my life in my hands? Though God slay me, yet I will hope in him. I will surely defend my ways to his face. Indeed, this will turn out for my deliverance, for no godless person would dare come before him. Listen carefully to what I say. Let my words ring in your ears. Now that I have prepared my case, I know I will be vindicated. Can anyone bring charges against me? If so, I will be silent and die. Only grant me these two things, God, and then I will not hide from you. Withdraw your hand from me, and stop frightening me with your terrors. Then summon me, and I will answer. Or let me speak, and you reply to me. How many wrongs and sins have I committed? Show me my offenses and my sin. Why do you hide your face and consider me your enemy? Will you torment a wind-blown leaf? Will you chase after dry chaff? For you write down bitter things against me and make me reap the sins of my youth. You fasten my feet in shackles. You keep close watch on all my paths by putting marks on the soles of my feet. At the beginning of the spring semester, the Pepperdine University Frederick R. Weissman Museum of Art opened a new art exhibition entitled Makoto Fujimura Water Flames, which is absolutely free, by the way, and I encourage you to go. The exhibition featured a number of paintings by the artist, wait for it, Makoto Fujimura. Yes, exactly. Fujimura is a Christian artist, and he is especially known for his abstract paintings. A couple of weeks ago, I went to the Weissman Museum to see the exhibit, and there was one painting there that particularly struck me. The name of the piece is The Rose and the Flame Are One. And here it is on the screen. It is a large piece, standing taller than me, I guess. And that's pretty tall, given how tall I am, right? Okay, I thought so. And although you can see an image of the painting here on the screen, I encourage you to go and see the piece, along with the rest of the exhibit, for yourself if you're able. The painting is a beautiful mixture of red, blue, and green, with just a faint image of a rose in the upper middle. As its name suggests, the painting evokes a sense that the rose in the middle of the painting is burning, with the bright red colors on the left of the painting and the form of the rose in the middle being almost ephemeral, as though it's flicking in and out of view, as though it's fire. And yet the left side of the painting, with all of its vibrant green, suggests the integrity of the rose is not lost. It is flourishing and full, and here, reach out and hold it. You can see the details closer here, and you can look at the painting for a long time and always notice something new in the details, which you can see better here in this zoomed in version. The Rose and the Flame Are One is a piece of Christian art that is itself a meditation on another piece of Christian art. And that piece is a poem by T.S. Eliot called Four Quartets. To understand Four Quartets, it helps to understand a little bit about Eliot's biography. T.S. Eliot was an American-British poet and author born in St. Louis, Missouri in 1888. He's widely considered to be one of the greatest poets of the 20th century. His work, especially the work towards the end of his life, often explored the connection between his Christian faith and the experience of suffering. Eliot was well acquainted with both. He was born with a congenital double hernia that severely slowed his childhood development, and the result was a childhood that was painful and isolating. And even after he was grown, Eliot went on to live through the Great Depression, World War I, World War II, the latter of which had a profound effect on his outlook on humanity. In 1915, Eliot married Vivian Haywood, but the marriage was not a happy one. Both Eliot and Vivian were beset with illnesses throughout their marriage. Vivian suffered from migraines, insomnia, temperatures, and other afflictions, which is probably what led to her eventual dependence on drugs like opium and other things. Eliot himself drank excessively, and the couple separated, never to reconcile. Despite, or perhaps because of his suffering, Eliot converted in his adult life and became an Anglican Christian, after which he committed himself to the work of his local church. Eliot is famous for many works of poetry, but arguably the culmination of his life's work is his collection of poems, Four Quartets. It is a masterpiece of poetry, and it is the work that most of all led to Eliot receiving the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1944. Four Quartets is composed of 4 poems, each poem having 5 parts, and each poem being associated with one of the 4 classical elements: air, earth, water, and fire. Four Quartets explores many themes, including the nature of time, stillness, and silence, but one theme I want to focus on today is its exploration of the idea of redemptive suffering. The idea that suffering may somehow be a means to living life fully. Given the experiences of his life, it is easy to see why the theme of redemptive suffering might have been an important one to Eliot. This theme is especially prominent in the last poem in Four Quartets, titled Little Gidding. Little Gidding ends where the very first poem in Four Quartets begins, in a garden, very much suggestive of the Garden of Eden. And here is how the very end of Four Quartets reads. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Through the unknown, unremembered gate, when the last of earth left to discover is that which was the beginning. At the source of the longest river, the voice of the hidden waterfall, and the children in the apple tree. Not known because not looked for, but heard, half heard, in the stillness, between 2 waves of the sea. Quick now, here, now, always, a condition of complete simplicity, costing not less than everything. All shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. when the tongues of flame are enfolded into the crowned knot of fire, and the fire and the rose are one. Here at the end of 4 quartets, we are brought to a conclusion, but not a conclusion. We will not cease from exploration, Eliot tells us, and yet, at the end of our exploring, we end back where we began, in the garden from which we were expelled, in a past that is at once remembered and also unremembered. As the theologian Aidan Kimmel comments on Little Gidding, we walk through the gate long guarded by the angel with the flaming sword. We come to the source of the great river that flows from Eden. We hear a hidden waterfall and the sweet laughter of Adam and Eve. The laughter is a childlike one, though. One that is innocent and simple, like from a time before Adam and Eve had eaten of the forbidden fruit. We rejoice in their play and yearn to join them in their gaiety and frolic. The original prohibition has been lifted. There is now only a freedom of humanity transfigured in Christ. But we must be very quiet, for the sounds of the new Eden can only be heard in the stillness, between 2 waves of the sea. Thus, in the final consummation of 4 quartets, we see the beautiful reconciliation of what might seem like irreconcilable dichotomies: movement and stillness, sound and silence, violence and peace, death and life, time and eternity. They are all reconciled in the flames of divine love. Not a return to an Eden irretrievably lost, but the transfiguration of this moment, every moment, beginning and ending. All shall be well. All is well. And so 4 quartets ends with these words: and the fire and the rose are one. Consider what these words must have meant to Eliot, someone well acquainted in his life with both grief and with redemption. Fire, often associated with trial, hardship, purging, and the kind of intensity that will break those not prepared for it. Fire will consume you and leave behind nothing but ashes. But by contrast, roses are often associated with what is beautiful in life. Its color is deep and vivid. Its stem is long and tall. And think about how many petals a rose has compared to other flowers. It has almost an embarrassing abundance about it, the rose does. But what Eliot knows, and what he wants us to see, is that grief and abundance are only one. The heat and light and intensity of fire has its own kind of beauty, and the thorns of the rose has its own kind of pain. The two are not separate. They are one and the same. For it is actually through difficulty and through suffering that our capacity to be truly human, our capacity to connect with others, and our capacity to draw near to God are profoundly deepened. It turns out that an easy life, a comfortable life, that turns out to be no life at all. Rather, it is those who go through suffering and come out on the other side who are blessed. The poor, the oppressed, the suffering, those who mourn, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, they know the truth. What they know is the fire and the rose are one. And so that brings us to the beginning, that brings us to the book of Job. The book of Job begins by telling us that there was once a man, Job, who lived in the land of Uz. And Job was righteous and upright, we are told. But besides being righteous, Job is also rich. He has 7 sons and 3 daughters. He has 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, many other things. And when his children throw parties and celebrate feasts, Job afterwards offers sacrifices to the Lord. Perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts, he thinks. And so he offers a sacrifice for them, just in case. That is the kind of person that Job is. But quickly we learn in the first chapter of Job that things are not as good as they seem. One called the tempter appears before the Lord in heaven. Where does the tempter come from? How has he come before the Lord? Well, we're not told. When asked these questions by God, the tempter only responds, I have been roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth through it. I guess that answer will have to do. It's not a good one. But enough with the small talk. Satan has a complaint with God, and here it is. God puts a hedge around Job. And Satan argues Job is only righteous because he is protected. If Job weren't healthy and rich, if the work of his hand wasn't blessed, if he no longer had his family and his home, then he would not serve God. And to show that this is so, Satan appeals to God to remove the hedge so that Job may be tested. And God relents and allows it. And so Job loses everything. He loses his animals, he loses his houses, he loses his wealth, and he even loses his children and his health. And by the time we reach chapter 3, we find Job sitting in ashes, covered in boils, mourning the death of his children and his livestock, and being visited by his friends. Now Job's friends are sure that Job must have done something to deserve this. Certain as they are, they thus question Job, considering what he might have done to upset God. And by the time we get to chapter 13, which we read earlier, his friends have done an awful lot of suggesting, as you might imagine. They have given all their views, while Job listens. But when we get to chapter 13, finally it's Job's turn. Job begins in chapter 13 by telling his friends he's had enough. My eyes have seen all this. My ears have heard and understood it, he tells them. But what they have said is worthless. And if they had been altogether silent, if they had said nothing at all, well, this would have been a profound wisdom compared to what they had to offer. And so Job says they will now hear what he has to say. And what is it that Job has to say? Two things. First, Job declares his innocence. Although his friends believe there must be something Job did to deserve his suffering, although they believe that Job is being stubborn and not admitting wrong, or at least that he's simply mistaken, he has forgotten what he's done, Job nonetheless insists that he has done nothing to offend God. And this leads to the second thing that Job has to say. Job wants an audience with God. His friends are poor spokespeople for God, Job says. They speak wickedly on God's behalf, Job says. But if God showed up, would they speak deceitfully to him? Could they argue their case to God? Would it turn out well if God examined them? No, Job says, and so they should be silent. But not Job. Job has prepared his case. He will vindicate himself, he thinks. And so he demands an audience with God. Job says he will not hide from God. Then summon me and I will answer, Job says. Or let me speak, and you reply to me. Job goes on, how many wrongs and sins have I committed? Show me my offense and my sin. For you write down bitter things against me. You fasten my feet in shackles. Why the accusations from a mere mortal, don't you think? But even still, Job seems to know his place. Job says to God that he is but a leaf before him. And in his suffering, in his grief, and in his pain, Job is like a leaf tossed about in the wind, impotent to save itself from the tornado. And so, leaf that he is, Job asks God to stop it. Will you torment a wind-blown leaf? Job asks. Well, Job gets what he asks for. But when God shows up, it is not Job who questions God. I'm sure you read this. It is God who questions Job. The first words of God come in Job 38, and this is how they start. This is how we're going. Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you will answer me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together, and all the angels shouted for joy. Or who shut up the sea with doors, when it burst forth from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment, and wrapped it in thick darkness? When I fixed limits for it, and set its doors and bars in place? When I said, thus far shall you come, and no farther. Here is where your proud waves stop. Declare if you know this. Whoa. Let that settle in for a bit, huh? God goes on like this for basically 4 whole chapters against Job, which I highly encourage you to read, by the way. They're some of my favorite in the Bible. But after God gives this speech to Job, which is just question after question after unanswerable question, here's Job's response. I am unworthy. What shall I reply to you? I put my hand over my mouth. I spoke once, but I have no answer. Twice, but I will say no more. I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. You asked, who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. You said, listen now, and I will speak. I will question you, and you will answer me. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I dismiss myself, and repent in dust and ashes. There are so many things about Job's response, it seems to me, that are beautiful. But what I want to focus on especially is what Job says at the end. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes have seen you. It almost seems that Job is comforted by his encounter with God. Do you get that sense too? Humbled, to be sure. What shall I answer you, Job says. I lay my hand on my mouth. So yes, humbled, but primarily comforted. Surely this is a strange reaction, given that in his speech to Job, God really takes Job to task. He questions him relentlessly. He demonstrates that the wisdom of God far exceeds anything Job could ever comprehend. He tests Job, and Job has no answer. And yet, Job is not unsettled by his encounter with God. Instead, he is comforted. How can this be? The answer to this question, it turns out, lies not in anything God said to Job. After all, Job himself says he had heard of the Lord already. In the end, he doesn't learn anything he didn't deep down already know. Instead, the answer to why it is that Job is comforted lies in what Job sees. For when God appears to Job, we read in Job 38, verse 1, Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. Did you catch that? When Job sees God, what does he see? He sees a whirlwind. And seeing God as a whirlwind, and hearing what God says from the whirlwind, Job is comforted. Why? Because Job told us, after all, that he is a wind-blown leaf. See, Job acknowledges in chapter 13 that compared to God, he is as substantial as a leaf, which is to say, not substantial at all. The life of us humans is much like a leaf, after all. We feel strong and mighty while we're on the branch. But when we're knocked down by the winds of life, we are not so powerful after all. But what Job learns in his encounter with God is that when Job was tossed to and fro by the wind, when he felt like a leaf, unable to do anything by itself, even when it felt like he was in the middle of the whirlwind, what Job learned was God is in the whirlwind. Are you with me? Job learned what T.S. Eliot learned, hard wisdom though it is to gain. Job knows that it is actually through his suffering that he is drawn into deeper love with God, who is always and already with him the whole time. Not that suffering is in itself good, but that somehow it seems to those who make it through suffering to the other side, they often find out that suffering was an indispensable means by which their capacity for compassion, human connection, and even the capacity to love is profoundly deepened. It is why the love of those who seem to have had life easy seems cheap and sometimes shallow. What Job knows, what T.S. Eliot knows, is that the fire and the rose are one. So may you, in your suffering, come out on the other side a stronger, more luminous, more beautiful soul than when you started. May you know that even when it feels like you are but a leaf tossed about by the wind, that God has not left you. May you one day say, I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes have seen you. May you come to find out that the fire and the rose are one. May you come to find out that God is in the world. The Lord bless you.